Hello dear students, welcome to Bajirao Ias Academy Interview Guidance Program 2023. In this lecture, we will be discussing about most contested and most debatable issue, that is India's secularism. Now if you look at secularism, the basic definition of secularism is separation of state from the religion, right? The secularism is actually a concept which has its origins in the Western world, right? So it has primarily originated in the Western world, and those Western countries, especially US and Europe, they believe in strict separation of state and religion. However, if you look at India's secularism is known as the model of principled distance. So it does not involve strict separation of state and religion, right? So India's secularism is often considered as positive form of secularism because it permits the intervention of the state whenever it is required, right? So however, the negative secularism, which is actually followed by the Western countries, that doesn't permit the intervention of the state in the religious matters, and religion also should not intervene in the state. So therefore, the Western model of secularism, especially the negative form of secularism, has its origins or has its evolutionary history, particularly with respect to the conditions that were prevailed in the medieval European history. Okay, so that is considered as a black age or black period in the Western Europe. However, Indian secularism has not defined anywhere in the constitution, but Indian secularism is actually called as positive secularism because Indian secularism permits the intervention of the state whenever a reform is required or whenever religion is considered as backward. Now in this context, we need to understand the basic definition of secularism. So as I have already told you, the secularism actually means separation of state and religion. So it does not permit the intervention of the state in the religious matters and religious intervention in the policy matters of the state, right? So in this context, so please understand secularism as a topic which is given in the syllabus of UPSC in General Studies Paper 1. Now, secularism is also a very important concept for UPSC interview. So there are chances that you may get questions on secularism or may get questions on secular fabric of India. So therefore, in this context, secularism is actually an ideology that emphasizes on separation of religion and state, and it also emphasizes on neutrality of the government with respect to the religious beliefs. So this is just a formal definition of what I have already told you. So that generally involves a strict separation of state and religion. Now in this context also, secularism involves separation of religion and the state, and there's a neutrality of the state. Okay, so state remains neutral in the matters of religion. Okay, so this is what the secularism basic definition. So however, if you understand secularism, it has two broad meanings. Now it has two broad meanings. So these two broad meanings also flows from the positive and negative forms of secularism, which I have already emphasized on just now. So one broad meaning of the secularism is separation of religion from the state, right? So this is the negative form of secularism. In negative form of secularism, what we see, a strict separation of state and religion. So this is otherwise called as dharma nirapekshata, right? So this negative form of secularism is called as dharma nirapekshata. So however, India follows the positive form of secularism. Again, I am emphasizing what is positive form of secularism. In positive form of secularism, there's a permissible state intervenes in the matters of religion. So this is called as the positive secularism. So in this context, there will be equal respect for all religions. So this essentially means that state treats all the religions equally. So this is what there will be state intervention. However, the state treats all the religions equally, and this flows from the philosophy of Sarma Dharma Sambhava. Now this Sarmadharma Sambhava, you may have heard in the ethics. So this is very important, and this has been emphasized by Mahatma Gandhi. That is Sarmadharma Sambhava. So this Sarvadharma Sambhava is essentially emphasizes on equal respect to all the religions, and that is the essence of India's secularism. So in fact, Indian constitution essentially aims for secular state where all religions are treated equally, right? So again, I'm telling that there's nowhere secularism has been defined in the constitution. Okay. So however, the original constitutional text also did not contain the term secularism. However, through the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, the concept of secularism was added. The ideal of secularism was added to the Constitution, that too preamble. So apart from preamble, nowhere in the Constitution we can find the secularism. So however, there are certain provisions so which actually reflect the principles of secularism. Okay, so therefore Indian Constitution essentially tried to create a secular state where all religions will be treated equally. Now in this context, we need to understand the constitutional provisions pertaining to secularism in India. So what are the basic constitutional provisions which are pertaining to the secularism? Okay, now while making constitution, so there was a debate in the Constituent Assembly by the members of the assembly about inclusion of the term of secularism in the constitution, because we have the bitter experiences of partition at that time. So however, the constitutional framers, even though they have included several provisions in the constitution, they have not mentioned the term secularism anywhere in the constitution. Okay, so in this context, the concept of secularism was not expressly mentioned in the Indian constitution. Okay, so explicitly not mentioned anywhere in the constitution, that is, so the concept of secularism. So however, Indian constitution has spelled out several provisions in part 3. Now if you look at the part 3 fundamental rights from article 12 to article 32, so there are number of provisions which reflect the features of secularism. Now apart from that, if you look at part 4 of Directive Principles of State Policy, so they also reflect certain secular policies, and part 4A, so that reflects fundamental duties, so they also reflect the existence of secularism and secular principles. Now in this context, we will try and understand, so what are those provisions which essentially emphasizes on the secular aspect of India. So firstly, Article 14 of the Indian Constitution. So Article 14 provides equality before law and equal protection of laws to all, right? So it essentially ensures equality of all and equal protection of laws for all. So there will be no discrimination between different religions and between different individuals who are practicing different religions, etc. So everyone will be treated equally as per Article 14, and this is also in line with the secular principles. So after that, we need to talk about Article 16 clause 1. So this article guarantees equal opportunity. So it provides equal opportunity to all citizens in the matters of public employment, and it also reiterates that there would be no discrimination on the basis of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, and residence, right? So absolutely there will be no discrimination on the citizens in the name of religion. So it provides equal opportunity for every citizen in the matters of public employment. So after that, we need to talk about certain secular principles, right to religion, which have been mentioned in Article 25 to Article 28 of the Indian Constitution. Now what Article 25 essentially talks about? So it actually provides for freedom of conscience. Okay, so freedom of conscience means, so what you believe, you practice, right? This is what the essence of freedom of conscience. So therefore in this context, it provides freedom of conscience, that is, all persons are equally treated, right? So freedom of conscience and right to freely profess, practice, propagate one's own religion. Now every individual have certain belief system, and every individual follows certain practices of a religion. So therefore they are free to practice their respective religion, right? So there will be no pressure on those individuals, or there will be no external influence from the state or any other individual. There will be no coercion or no forceful conversions of the people. So that is what Article 25 of the Indian Constitution says. So apart from that, we need to talk about Article 26 of the Indian Constitution. So this is also part of right to religion. Now Article 26 says that every religious group or individuals has the right to establish or maintain the institutions for religious or charitable purposes and to manage its own affairs in the matters of religion. Now, so India, since a secular nation, and it is a nation with multiple religions, so therefore Article 26 has provided a certain degree of autonomy to these religious and charitable institutions, right? So they can manage their own affairs in the matters of religion. So therefore it provides a certain degree of autonomy to these religious institutions. So after that, we need to talk about Article 27 of the Indian Constitution. So what Article 27 talks about? So it provides that the state shall not compel any citizen to pay any taxes for the maintenance of any particular religion. Now, when an institution or an individual who is managing his own religious affairs, who is running a religious organization, the state will not compel him or her to pay taxes for running those religious organizations. So in this context, so they are free to pay taxes to the state, or state cannot coerce them or force them to pay taxes. So this is what Article 27 says. Now there's another article which is also part of right to religion, that is Article 28 of the Indian Constitution, right? So this allows that the educational institutions maintained by different religious groups to impart religious instruction. Okay, so there are different educational institutions which are run by the religious organizations. So it allows those educational institutions which are run by the religious groups to organize or conduct the religious instruction, right? So apart from article right to religion, we also have Article 29 and 30, and they provide a certain cultural and educational rights for the minorities, and they also reflect the secular principles of the Indian Constitution. For example, we have minorities like Parsis, Muslims and Christians, and they have the right to protect their own cultural and educational rights. So after that, we need to talk about the fundamental duties as well. Article 51A, fundamental duties, part 4A of the Indian Constitution, right? So the fundamental duties, one of its provisions is it obliges all citizens to promote the harmony and spirit of common brotherhood and to preserve the rich heritage of our composite culture. So this essentially emphasizes on the value of tolerance and value of brotherhood, living together with harmony or living together in harmony, right? So this is also emphasizes on the secular principle or secular ideal of the Indian Constitution. So these are some of the provisions which reflect the secular nature of the Indian Constitution. Now apart from this, we need to understand the basic difference between Indian secularism versus Western secularism. So there are a certain degree of difference between Indian secularism and Western secularism. Now if you look at the Western secularism, the Western concept of secularism connotes a complete separation between religion and state. So in the introduction of this lecture, I have already told you that the Western concept of secularism actually emphasizes there will be a complete separation of state and religion. So however, if you look at the Indian Constitution or Indian model of secularism, Indian Constitution essentially embodies the positive concept of secularism. So that is giving equal respect to all religions or treating all the religions equally. So that is Indian model of secularism. Now after that, the Western model of secularism, or in the Western model of secularism, the state cannot give financial support to educational institutions run by the religious communities, right? So there are certain educational institutions in Western countries, which are run by the religious organizations. So however, the state is not permitted to fund or finance those educational institutions. Okay, so and at the same time, it cannot hinder the activities of religious communities as long as they are within the broad limits set by the law of the land. So they cannot intervene in any of the religious matters. The state cannot intervene in any of the religious matters in Western countries. So as long as they are within the purview or within the limits of the law of the land. So this is what you have to understand when it comes to the Western model of secularism. Now, when we talk about the Indian constitution, it actually permits the state to provide financial assistance to the educational institutions which are managed by the religious organizations. Okay, so however, the financial support, the nature of the financial support is partial financial support for these religious organizations. And at the same time, the constitution has also permitted the intervention of the state in the religious matters in certain aspects. Now, the other different feature of the Western secularism is there's a no place for idea of state supported religious reforms. So state will not and will never support any religious reforms in the Western countries. So however, if you look at the Indian model of secularism, so Indian secularism is actually compatible with the idea of state supported religious reform. Right, so state in fact supports the religious reform. Now, if you look at the recent Sabarimala issue, and in fact recent triple talaq issue, so everything, so state will support the reforms within the religions. So there's also another example which is given as part of Indian model of secularism and state intervention. The constitution bans the untouchability under Article 17 of the Indian Constitution. The government has enacted laws abolishing the child marriage as well, right? So the government has also enacted the Abolition of Child Marriage Act 2003. So therefore, in this context, in order to bring reforms in those religions, in order to bring in more progressive nature of these religions, state will intervene in the context of Indian secularism. So therefore, this is the basic difference between Indian secularism and Western model of secularism. Now, after that, we have to understand what are the factors that threaten India's secular fabric. Okay, so there are certain factors that actually threaten India's secular fabric. Firstly, we need to talk about the political interference in religion. Okay, so there's a very often political interference in the religious matters. For example, mobilizing of voters in the name of religion. So vote bank politics is one of the main issue, and in fact hate speeches in the name of religion and further fragmentation and marginalization of voters is another major challenge when it comes to the strengthening India's secular fabric, right? So increasing interference of religion in politics is actually a major challenge facing the secular state. Now, secular states have been facing this as a major drawback or major challenge. So after that, there's non-separation of religion from politics. Now, if you look at Indian politics, the characteristics of Indian politics still not separated from religion. Okay, so for example, if you look at the past instances, for example, demolition of Babri Masjid, anti-Sikh riots that took place in 1984 where Sikhs were massacred, and Mumbai riots in the 1992 and in 1993, Godhra riots 2002, etc. So they have shown a well-established problem of communalism. Now, I have also explained you the communalism, the factor of communalism. Okay, so communalism is a main idea behind all these rights, or it also reflects non-separation of religion from politics. Okay, so after that, we have also seen the trend of exclusion of minorities. So when we say exclusion of minorities, so it certainly gives a feeling of insecurity in minorities. Okay, religious minorities today. So this makes it difficult to create a secular society. Now, secularism actually built on the ideas of brotherhood, tolerance, living in harmony, everything, right? So when we exclude minorities from the government policies, or when we exclude minorities from the a need for inclusive growth, so then that becomes very challenging and very difficult for us to create a secular society. Now after that, we need to talk about the Sachar committee recommendations on the exclusion of the minorities. Okay, so Muslims actually constitute 14% of India's population. So however, if you look at the composition in the Indian bureaucracy, it is just 2.5%. So you can imagine how how the other communities or how the minorities are actually being excluded. Now if you see such exclusions, and if you further fragment them, further marginalize them, so we cannot say that India is a secular state. And so therefore these factors have to be keep in mind. Now after that, the religious intolerance is another factor which has been emerging as a challenge for India, right? So religious intolerance is also on the rise recently. The recent example is being Delhi riots 2020. Okay, so especially we have seeing the inter-community clashes, particularly the communalism and rights like situation, and rising levels of intolerance, right? So all these factors will have a major impact on India's secularism, and in order to strengthen India's secular fabric, we need to take care of all these factors. So therefore, what measures we need to take so that can help India become a truly secular state? So what are the measures we have to take? So firstly, we need to talk about the social reforms, or the aspect of social reforms, right? So when we say social reform, uniform civil code is already mentioned in Article 44 of the Indian Constitution, in directive principles of state policy, and there are states like Goa which already implemented uniform civil code, and there's also a sustained push from some sections of the union government to implement the uniform civil code as well, right? So we need to bring social reforms like uniform civil code. So this will have to be organized, and public opinion have to be mobilized on this. And in fact, apart from public opinion, involving all stakeholders whenever we are taking up any social reform measure, or whenever there's an intervention of the state in the religious matters of the people. So therefore, the social reforms would be more and more fruitful. And apart from that, minorities should be encouraged to participate in the mainstream national life. So they should be encouraged, and if required, concession and incentives can be provided so that we can give them a level playing field to uplift them, so that can prevent them from further marginalization. So after that, we need to move from secular politics. We need to move away from the vote bank politics, right? So communal politics or vote bank politics need to be replaced with the secular politics to ensure religious tolerance. So that is actually the essence of ensuring religious tolerance when we move away from the when we move away from the communal politics and vote bank politics. So after that, we need to talk about combating religious extremism. We need to combat the religious extremism also. This is one of the key challenge. Religious extremism has been growing, fundamentalism, radicalization of youth, right? So religious based violence, so they will create internal security challenges, and they are also getting support from the non-state actors, and that will further promote terrorism and terror activities in our country. So therefore, the religious extremism has to be tackled. So strong measures need to be taken to combat religious extremism and promote the culture of tolerance and mutual respect. So we need to promote the culture of tolerance and mutual respect. So after that, we need to protect the minorities' rights. So protection of minorities' rights is also very important, right? So when we protect the minorities' rights, the sense of insecurity cannot be generated in the minds of those minorities. So therefore, it includes ensuring equal access to education, employment, and other opportunities, and as well as protecting the minority communities from the violence and hate crimes. Okay, so these are the measures that have to be taken in order to strengthen the secular fabric of our country. See, secularism is very important and very contested and debated topic, and you may get questions on secularism in the interview in order to test what exactly is your opinion. So don't be biased, and make sure that you include when you are talking about secularism, you include all the religions. Okay, so you have to take Indian constitution as your guide whenever you're giving an answer. So whatever you say, so that should be backed by the Indian constitution, and it should have the constitutionalism. The answer should reflect the constitutional spirit. So therefore that is the way to score good marks in the interview. Okay, so that's all for this lecture. Thank you.